The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agreed to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones House of the Dragon video. Alright my friends, in this video, we will be looking at another interview featuring Mr. Dinklage, who, as you all know, is famously known for his amazing role as Lord Tyrion Lannister in HBO's massively successful series, Game of Thrones. In this interview, he once again gives some of his thoughts about Game of Thrones and its divisive ending, as well as HBO's upcoming Game of Thrones successor show, House of the Dragon. While Dinklage has moved on from Westeros, the Game of Thrones universe may be just beginning. As you all know, HBO is working on House of the Dragon, a new show set hundreds of years before the events of the original series set to air later this year. Let me show you what Dinklage has to say about the new show. "I think the trick is not to try to recreate Thrones," he says. "If you try to recreate it, that feels like a money grab. With a lot of sequels, the reason for them is that the first one made a lot of money, which is why they're not as strong. But I am excited to watch the House of the Dragon, simply as a viewer, not knowing what will happen next." Now, maybe it's just me, but I don't think it sounds like he's that excited for House of the Dragon, although what he said is valid. We all know Game of Thrones was HBO's most successful show to date. I remember reading several financial articles that stated HBO made billions of dollars from Game of Thrones alone. So, I understand why HBO wants to make another Game of Thrones show immediately after the original series ended. They want to strike while the iron is hot, but we all know they could also run the risk of ruining the Game of Thrones brand if they rush another series out before it's ready. This is basically what was about to happen with the series about the Long Night, hence the reason why they shut it down after only making its first episode. They already made one mistake by letting Dan and Dave end Game of Thrones the way that they did. If House of the Dragon, or any other Game of Thrones series for that matter, stumbles out of the gate in the first season, they might lose even more fans than they already have. As you all know, HBO already has to win back over a lot of the Game of Thrones fans because they're still angry with how the original show ended. In fact, there are many Game of Thrones fans who say they will never watch another series from HBO ever again. Millions of fans were furious with the finale of Game of Thrones when our Mother of Dragons, Daenerys Targaryen, went genocidal. In reference to this, Mr. Dinklage said, "The fans were just mad because nobody wanted it to be over." He also said, "I know a lot of the fans were shocked by the ending, but if you were watching closely, the signs were always right there." So, as you can see, he says fans should have known Daenerys would have went mad by the end. Well, I will say what I have always said once again. I don't think the fans were angry simply because Daenerys went mad in the end. I think most of them were angry because of how fast it seemed to have happened. Yes, of course, there were many signs that this would happen, but it's as if a switch was flipped in the final season. In only the span of a few episodes, Daenerys went from a somewhat rational and understanding character to one that was blinded by homicidal rage. It was definitely a shock to the system, because it almost felt as if it happened overnight. Now, this isn't all Dinklage had to say about the final season. If you have seen all of my recent videos, then you know he had a lot more to say about the fans' outrage over the Game of Thrones ending. If you already saw that video, then you can stop this one right here. If you haven't seen his other interview from last week, I will show you that now. I think you might be interested in this one as well, although it might leave you shaking your head once you see what he said. For everyone else who has already saw that interview, I want to thank you for watching this video. Now, if you're like me, I think you will find this to be not only interesting, but mostly annoying because I think it's another attempt at dismissing at least some of the fans' criticism of Game of Thrones Season 8. Let's have a look at the new article so I can show you what Mr. Dinklage said about the final season of Game of Thrones. The headline reads, "Dinklage says Game of Thrones fans were upset about the finale because they wanted the white characters to ride off into the sunset." He is basically saying that fans were only upset because Jon and Dany did not sit on the Iron Throne together. That's right, he did not hold back in a recent interview with the New York Times when it was brought up that Game of Thrones fans were let down by the show's finale. He also said, "By the way, it's fiction," he added with a laugh. "There's dragons in it. Move on." Alright, now I also want to give some of my own thoughts on what he said so far. First off, let me just say this. I am a massive fan of the actor. Not only do I think he brilliantly brought Tyrion Lannister to life on the screen, but he also delivered some of the greatest scenes in Game of Thrones. I think it's safe to say that Dinklage was one of the best actors on the show. I think he helped make Tyrion one of the most beloved characters in a cast that was full of dozens of great actors and actresses. Now, with that out of the way, I also want to say that I completely disagree with what he said in the interview. For him to say that fans were only upset with the finale because the gorgeous white characters weren't riding off into the sunset together is simply false. If you go back and watch all of my older videos, you will see that I said Jon Snow will never want the Iron Throne, which made sense because that's who he was as a character. He was never in it for the Iron Throne, so we would have been foolish to think that's where he would have ended. Now, Dany, on the other hand, is a different story. As we all know, Daenerys was focused on taking back King's Landing as well as the Iron Throne, but fans were not angry just because she didn't get it. Daenerys fans were furious because of who her character became in such a short span of episodes. She basically became Adolf Hitler by the end of the series, shocking millions of fans because it seemed to happen so suddenly. They're not angry because Jon and Dany weren't holding hands overlooking King's Landing in the end. Let us also not forget what happened to the Night King. Now, for me, this was the most upsetting, and it wasn't only because Arya Stark was the one who defeated the Night King. If you have seen my videos, then you know why I think it was a bad idea to have Arya stop the Night King. However, the other thing that was so upsetting about this was the fact that the Night King and his army were defeated almost immediately after they made it through the wall. As you all know, this was something they were building up since the very first episode of the very first season. Then, when the Night King finally moves south, he's defeated by someone who didn't even know he existed before the final season. You want to know what else made a lot of us fans upset about the final season? Jaime and Cersei Lannister. For one, we were extremely unsatisfied with how they died. Not only that, but I was also heartbroken when I heard Jaime say he never cared about saving everyone in King's Landing. It was already bad enough that he ran back to Cersei, but by him saying this, it ruins that amazing scene he had with Brienne when they were bathing in Season 3. Now, don't even get me started on what happened in Dorne, or what happened with Arya Stark when she was in Braavos. Saying that the fans were only angry because Jon and Dany weren't sitting on the Iron Throne is so dismissive. Our frustration with the final season goes way deeper than just this. Do I even need to mention how Euron Greyjoy's character was handled? Or how the Golden Company was dismantled in seconds? I mean, the list of criticisms could go on, but I want to go over some of the other things that he said in the interview. Let's go back to when he said, by the way, it's fiction. There's dragons in it. Move on. Now, just because there were dragons in the show doesn't mean we should ignore every mistake the writers made. Again, I can only speak for myself here, but Game of Thrones wasn't just some dumb show that had dragons for me. It was much more than that. Game of Thrones was groundbreaking in so many ways, and in fact, I think it redefined fantasy in a way that had never been seen on television before. Game of Thrones had a vast array of fascinating and complex characters that blurred the lines of good and evil. Even though the show did have dragons and magic, the relationships the characters had with one another made them feel real. All of us who did love the show immediately identified and connected with a number of different characters. And this made me care about them more than any other character from different shows or movies I had ever seen before. Everyone else who worked behind the scenes helped make this show and universe feel realistic. The set designers, the makeup artists, the costume designers, the incredible music, and so on and so forth. Let's see what else Mr. Dinklage had to say. He said, yeah, it was called Game of Thrones, but at the end, the whole dialogue when fans would approach me on the street was, who's gonna be on the throne? I don't know why that was their takeaway because the show was really more than that. Dinklage said that one of his favorite moments from the finale was when Daenerys Targaryen's dragon burned the Iron Throne. Because it sort of just killed that whole conversation, which is really irreverent and kind of brilliant on behalf of the show's creators. He said, shut up, it's not about that, Dinklage added, referencing David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. They constantly did that, where you thought one thing and they delivered another, he said. Everybody had their own stories going on while watching that show, but nobody's was as good as what the show delivered, I think. Wow, he actually thinks no one could have written it better than what David and Dan did? Well, once again, I disagree. And I would bet that he feels somewhat different as well, but he doesn't want to go against HBO because I'm sure he would love to work there again. He also said that he felt audiences were angry about how the show ended because the show was simply coming to an end in general. We were going off the air, and they didn't know what to do with their Sundays anymore. They wanted more, so they backlashed about that. Well, my friend, we were not the only ones who wanted more.
Why is it ending? I don't know. Ask David and Dan when they come through. We could have gone to 11, 12, 13 seasons, but I guess they wanted a life.
So you wanted it to keep going.
Well, if you've read my novels, you know there was enough material for more seasons. They made certain cuts.